All right, everybody, school is officially back in session, which means teachers everywhere are getting ready to hand out some grades. So today, instead of just giving you the Oviedo Winter Springs housing numbers, I figured we'd give the real estate market its first report card of the school year. And just like some of my students, there are a couple grades on here that are going to require an explanation at home. First subject, inventory, B+. We currently have 327 houses for sale, down slightly from 328 last week. That's actually pretty stable. We're not seeing inventory pile up dramatically, but buyers definitely have more choices than they did in those crazy COVID market years. And July finished with 155 houses sold, which puts us at about 2.1 months of supply. So inventory gets a B+. Good job, participates in class, could still improve. Next up, list prices. C. The median price dropped from 485,000 last week to 475 this week. That doesn't mean that every house in Oviedo Winter Springs suddenly lost 10K in value. Remember, this is simply the median of the houses that are currently listed, but it does tell me sellers may be starting to understand the assignment a little bit better. You have to price your house correctly in this market. The days of saying, well, my neighbor got this much 2 years ago, so mine must be worth more, and adding another 40K because you just installed a new ceiling fan. Yeah, that student gets a C. Median price per square foot stayed right at 247, so pricing overall is pretty stable. Days on the market, C+. Average days on the market, 76 days, exactly where we were last week. 76 days is a completely different market than when houses were selling in a weekend with 15 offers. So sellers, if your house has been listed for 2 weeks and you're starting to panic, chill. But if it's been sitting for 76 days or 67, nobody's coming through the door, we may need to schedule a parent-teacher conference about your price. Pending sales this week. We had 34 houses go pending this week, so we're at a B compared with 36 last week. Pretty steady. Buyers are still buying. They're just being a little more selective about which houses they buy and what price they're willing to pay. That gets a B. Doing the work. Turning in the assignments. Nothing spectacular, but perfectly respectable. Sold homes. You get a C. We had 28 houses closed this week, down from 41 last week. Now, before anyone sees that number and yells, the market's crashing. No. 1 week of closing can bounce around quite a bit depending on what contracts happen to close. In fact, July had 155 sales, which is pretty strong locally. So sold homes get a C. But they're not going to get sent home to summer school yet. No worries. Now, here's the A+ on the report card, days to contract. The houses that sold this week took an average of only 28 days to go under contract. Last week was 56. That's a huge improvement. And this is something sellers really need to pay attention to. The houses that are priced correctly, show well, and buyers perceive as a good value can still move pretty quick. The problem isn't that buyers disappeared. The problem is buyers aren't willing to overpay for the kid who didn't study. Now, let's talk about the weirdest grade on the report card, median sold price. The median sold price this week was $618,000. Last week was $498,000, and for the entire month of July it was $483,000. So did Oviedo Winter Springs home value suddenly jump $100,000 in 1 week? Absolutely not. This is where you have to be careful looking at 1 week of data. We only had 28 houses close this week, and one of those sales was a $1.8 million house. Now, technically, because we're talking about the median, that $1.8 million sale doesn't just drag the average upward up by itself, but it tells you something really important about the group of houses that sold this week. We had some expensive houses on this week's report card. With only 28 sales, if more of those closings happen to be higher-end homes, that middle sale moves up pretty quickly. So I'm giving the median sold price an incomplete. I'm not even putting a grade on this one. I need to see more work before I'm sending this report card home. And that's exactly why I don't look at one number from 1 week and tell you, home prices are skyrocketing or plummeting. For the bigger picture, July's median sold price at $483,000 is much more useful than this week's $618,000. And our final grade, sales price versus list price, an A. Homes that closed this week sold for an average of 99% of their asking price, up from 97% last week. That's a very important number because despite higher inventory, longer marketing times, buyers have more negotiating power than they did a few years ago. Good houses are still selling very close to asking price. So what's the market's overall grade? Well, I'm giving the Oviedo Winter Springs housing market a B. Not an A. Not failing, just a solid B. Buyers have choices and some negotiating power. Sellers can still get excellent prices, but they have to price it correctly and make their house stand out. And neither side gets to sleep through class anymore. And that's your Market Talk Tuesday back to school report card for August 11th. I'm Chris Kapp with Luker & Co., realtor by day, teacher also by day, and apparently I need to work on that schedule. And I'll see you next Tuesday when we find out whether the market brought its grade up or whether I need to call its parents for a conference. See ya.